The alarm tore through the outpost before I even opened my eyes, and my hands were already reaching for my boots before my brain caught up with what was happening. Something had breached the outer fence. Not the automated turrets, not the motion sensors that usually caught nothing but drifting snow. Something had walked straight through solid steel, like it was paper, and the whole base was screaming about it. My name is Daniel Hale, and I never wanted to be a hero. I count supply crates and fix broken heaters on a frozen outpost at the very edge of explored space, a place called Kestrel 9, where the sun is a pale coin in a gray sky and nothing ever happens. Until that night, when everything happened at once. I grabbed my jacket and ran into the corridor, where Owen was already pressed against the window, his face pale in the red emergency light. "It's still out there," he said, his voice shaking. "Whatever it is, it's still out there, and it's not moving." I looked past him through the reinforced glass, and my breath caught in my throat. In the middle of the frozen field beyond the fence lay something enormous, black as the space between stars, with 6 long legs folded beneath it, and a ridge of sharp spines running down its back like broken glass. It was not attacking, it was not roaring, it was dying, and every breath it took shook the ground beneath it. "Kill the lights," Captain Marsh barked from behind us, already suited up, already holding a rifle, like it was an extension of his arm. "Nobody goes near that thing. It could be a trap. It could be a scout for something bigger." I should have listened. I want you to know that I heard him clearly, and some small sensible part of me agreed with every word. But there was another part of me, the part that grew up on a farm before I ever set foot on a colony ship, the part that has never once been able to walk past something suffering without trying to help, and that part was already moving toward the airlock before my mind gave permission. "Hale, get back here," Marsh shouted, but I was already keying the outer door. The cold hit me like a wall of knives the second the airlock opened, and the wind screamed across the frozen plain hard enough to knock me sideways. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, my boots crunching through ice that had not melted in 1,000 years. The creature's eyes opened as I approached, huge and black and wet, tracking me with a kind of exhausted awareness that made my chest tighten. It could have killed me in a single movement. Even dying, even broken, I could see the raw power coiled in its frame, the kind of strength that could tear a man apart before he even understood what was happening. But it did not move. It just watched me, breathing in long, ragged pulls, blood freezing black against the snow beneath its wounded side. "Okay," I whispered, my voice lost in the wind. "Let's see what we can do about that." I do not remember deciding to help it. I only remember doing it, dragging my emergency thermal cloak from my belt and wrapping it around the wound as gently as I could, feeling the heat of the creature's body even through my gloves, feeling it shudder beneath my hands. It made a sound then, low and rattling, not a growl, not a warning, but something closer to relief. Getting it inside nearly killed me. 300 pounds of alien predator does not move easily across ice, and my muscles screamed with every pull, my lungs burning in the freezing air. Marsh and Owen came out eventually, cursing the whole way, and together the 3 of us managed to drag it through the airlock and into the maintenance bay before the cold finished what its wounds had started. "You're out of your mind," Marsh said, staring down at the creature as it lay shivering on the metal floor. "You know that. You are completely out of your mind." "Maybe," I said, catching my breath. "But it's not attacking anyone. Look at it. It's just trying to survive." Nobody argued after that, not really. We did not have a proper medic on Kestrel 9, and none of us had ever seen anything like this creature before, but Priya, our engineer, had taken enough emergency training to know how to clean a wound and stop bleeding, even if the patient had 6 legs and jaws that could crush stone. Together we worked through the night, cutting away frozen fabric, cleaning frost from torn skin, feeding warm fluid through an improvised tube, while the creature watched us with those unblinking eyes. By morning it was still alive, and somehow, so was I. The days that followed felt strange, in a way I struggled to explain. Marsh kept his distance, still convinced we had made a terrible mistake, still certain that something this powerful would eventually turn on us the moment it regained its strength. Owen avoided the maintenance bay entirely, muttering about regulations and quarantine protocols that nobody on this outpost had ever actually followed. But Priya and I kept returning, feeding it, cleaning its wounds, sitting with it through the long silent hours when the storms outside made sleep impossible anyway. It never attacked, not once. It watched us with an intelligence that unsettled me more than any growl or snarl could have, as if it understood exactly what we were doing and why, as if it was making a decision about us with every single visit. On the 11th day, it stood. I was alone in the bay when it happened, checking the temperature readings on the emergency heater, when I heard the scrape of claws against metal, and turned to see it rising slowly onto all 6 legs, towering over me in a way that should have terrified me, and somehow did not. It swayed for a moment, unsteady, and I found myself stepping forward without thinking, one hand raised, ready to catch 300 pounds of alien predator if it fell. It did not fall. It looked at the door, then looked at me, and instead of walking toward freedom, it walked toward me instead, lowering its massive head until it rested against my chest, warm and heavy and impossibly gentle. "Okay," I breathed, my heart hammering. "Okay, big guy. I guess we're friends now." I named it Ember because of the way the weak light caught red undertones hidden deep within its black fur, like embers glowing beneath ash. It never seemed to mind the name. It never seemed to mind much of anything, as long as I was nearby. Word spreads fast on a small outpost, even one buried at the edge of nowhere, and within a week, half the base had found some excuse to walk past the maintenance bay just to see the enormous alien creature curled up beside my chair like an oversized, spiny dog. Marsh still refused to get close, but even he stopped talking about putting it down. Owen left extra rations by the door, always claiming they were leftovers, never quite admitting he had grown fond of the creature he once feared. I thought that was the strangest thing that would ever happen to me. I was wrong. 4 weeks after I found Ember in the snow, the alarms sounded again, but this time it was not a breach in the fence. It was an incoming vessel, sleek and silver, and unlike anything registered in our system, broadcasting override codes that made our communications officer go pale and start speaking rapidly into her headset. "It's not one of ours," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "It's not Federation. It's not Colonial. I don't recognize the signal at all." Marsh was already moving, rifle in hand, shouting orders down the corridor, but I stayed rooted in place, one hand resting on Ember's side as the massive creature lifted its head, ears flattening, a low sound rumbling deep in its chest that was not quite a growl and not quite excitement either. "You know something?" I murmured, watching him closely. "Don't you?" The ship landed outside the main hangar with a grace that made our entire fleet of transport shuttles look like scrap metal by comparison, and the doors hissed open to reveal a procession unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Armored escorts moved first, tall and silent, followed by a figure wrapped in fabric that shifted color like oil across water, moving with a kind of authority that made the air itself feel heavier. She stopped the instant she saw Ember, and for a moment, nobody in that hangar breathed. Then she dropped to one knee. Not a bow, a full genuflection, forehead nearly touching the frozen ground, in front of a creature who, only minutes earlier, had been leaning his enormous head against my leg while I scratched behind his spines. "You!" she said, rising slowly, her golden eyes fixed on me instead of the creature beside me. "You are the one who found him." "I found something bleeding in the snow," I said carefully, very aware of Marsh's rifle raised somewhere behind me, very aware that whatever was happening here was far bigger than anything I understood. I didn't know what he was. "He is not a what," she said, and her voice cracked with something that sounded almost like disbelief. "He is a blood warden, the last known blood warden in this entire sector. My people have searched 11 star systems for a survivor of the culling that nearly wiped his kind from existence. We believed the bloodline gone forever." Ember, entirely unbothered by his own apparent historical significance, chose that exact moment to yawn, jaws stretching wide enough to swallow a grown man whole, before flopping down heavily against my boots. "He is sacred to my people," the woman continued, watching him with an expression somewhere between awe and grief. "Blood wardens cannot be captured. They cannot be tamed, or commanded, or bred in captivity. A blood warden chooses, or a blood warden dies before ever accepting a master. And yet here he lies, calm, unafraid, resting at the feet of a human he met only weeks ago. "He's not resting at my feet," I said, trying and failing to keep my voice steady. "He's resting on my feet. There's a difference. He's heavy." She did not laugh, though something in her expression softened slightly. "Do you understand what this means?" I told her honestly that I did not. "It means," she said, "that you have become something my people have not seen in 400 years. We call it Warden's Kin. It is not a title given. It is a bond chosen entirely by the Blood Warden itself, based on nothing but its own judgment of character. There has never been a human granted this honor. Not once, in the entire history of our people." Behind her, every single one of her armored escorts sank slowly to one knee, and I stood there in the middle of a frozen hangar on the edge of nowhere, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me, feeling the weight of something I never asked for settle onto my shoulders like a physical thing. "Look," I said, forcing myself to speak clearly despite the tightness in my chest. "I didn't save him because I wanted a title or an honor or anything like that. I saved him because he was hurting, and I couldn't just leave him out there to die. That's it. That's the whole story." The princess studied me for a long, silent moment, her golden eyes searching my face, as if trying to determine whether I was lying. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because her posture eased slightly, the tension in her shoulders melting away. "That," she said quietly, "is precisely why he chose you. Blood Wardens have always been able to sense true intention. They do not respond to power, or wealth, or ambition. They respond only to genuine kindness, freely given without expectation of reward. In 400 years, no creature of his kind has found that kindness in anyone from any world. Until now." I looked down at Ember, who looked back up at me with those same black, unblinking eyes that had watched me change his bandages every single night, that had trusted me through fevered pain and long freezing hours when neither of us knew whether he would survive until morning. He was not sacred to me because of some ancient bloodline or forgotten prophecy. He was simply Ember, the creature I had carried in from the snow, the friend who leaned against my chest like it was the safest place in the entire universe. "He's not going anywhere he doesn't want to go," I told her, meeting her gaze directly despite every instinct telling me to look away. "I don't care what he means to your people or your history. If he wants to leave with you, that has to be his choice, not yours and not mine." For a long moment, silence hung over the hangar, thick enough to feel. Marsh shifted uneasily behind me, rifle still raised, waiting for some signal that never came. Then, unexpectedly, the princess smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine in a way that transformed her entire face. "Spoken exactly like someone worthy of the bond he has chosen," she said. "We are not here to take him, Daniel Hale. We are here because our sensors detected the return of a Blood Warden's life signature after 4 centuries of silence, and my people needed to know the truth for themselves. Whether he stays with you, or eventually chooses to travel with us someday, is entirely his decision to make, now and always." Ember lifted his massive head at the sound of his own unspoken fate being discussed, glanced briefly toward the shimmering ship waiting outside, and then, without hesitation, laid his head back down against my leg and closed his eyes as if the matter had never been in question at all. The princess laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I believe that settles things rather clearly. Over the following hours, she explained more than I ever expected to learn about creatures I once would have shot on sight without a second thought. Blood Wardens, she told me, were not predators in the way I understood the word. They were guardians, bonded protectors, chosen by ancient forces her people no longer fully understood, capable of sensing danger long before it arrived, capable of loyalty so absolute that entire civilizations once built their defenses around a single bonded pair. The culling that nearly wiped them out, centuries ago, had been driven by fear rather than reason, by those who saw only teeth and claws and never looked deeper. I thought about that for a long time after she finished speaking. I thought about how close I had come to listening to that same fear myself, standing in the airlock doorway with Marsh's warning ringing in my ears, so easy to turn back, so easy to let instinct win over instinct of a different kind. "Will you be all right out here?" the princess asked eventually, as her escorts began preparing to return to their ship. A blood warden requires purpose. He will not simply lie idle forever. We'll figure it out, I said, glancing toward Marsh, who to my surprise gave a small, reluctant nod. Perhaps having a creature capable of sensing danger before it arrived was not the worst thing that could happen to an outpost sitting alone at the edge of explored space. Before she left, the princess turned back one final time, her expression thoughtful. There is an old saying among my people, a blood warden does not save the worthy. A blood warden reveals them. She glanced down at Ember, then back at me. I think, in this case, the saying holds true in more ways than one. I did not entirely understand what she meant, not fully, not that day. The silver ship lifted away from Kestrel 9 within the hour, vanishing into the gray sky as quickly as it had arrived, and life on the outpost returned to something resembling normal, though nothing ever quite felt the same again. 3 nights later, I understood exactly what she meant. I was asleep when Ember woke me, not with a bark or a growl, but with the weight of his massive body pressing against my bunk hard enough to shake the frame. His ears were flattened, his black eyes wide and fixed on the far wall, and every muscle beneath his fur had gone rigid with tension. "What is it?" I whispered, already reaching for my jacket, my heart hammering before I even understood the danger. He did not answer, because of course he could not, but he moved toward the door with such urgency that I found myself following without question, pulling on my boots as I ran. The outpost alarms had not sounded yet. Whatever Ember sensed, our instruments had not caught it, and that alone was enough to send a cold spike of fear through my chest. I burst into the control room to find Priya already at her station, frowning at a sensor readout that made no sense. "There's something out there," she said slowly, moving through the storm belt, low and fast. It wasn't on scans 30 seconds ago. Marsh arrived seconds later, still pulling his jacket over his shoulders, rifle already in hand out of pure habit. "Talk to me." "I don't know what it is," Priya admitted, her fingers flying across the console. "It's not one of ours. It's not the shape of anything in our database, and it's heading straight for the outpost." Ember let out a low sound then, deep and rumbling, unlike anything I had heard from him before, a warning that vibrated through the floor itself. He pressed close against my side, positioning his body between me and the window, and for the first time since I had carried him in from the snow, I understood exactly what the princess meant when she called him a guardian, rather than simply a predator. The thing outside hit the outer fence within minutes, moving faster than anything should move through a storm that thick, tearing through the same steel barrier Ember himself had once shattered weeks earlier. Emergency lights flooded the corridors in pulsing red, and this time the alarm screamed in earnest, loud enough to rattle the walls. "Seal the maintenance bay," Marsh ordered, already moving toward the hangar. "Everyone else, get to the shelter now." I should have obeyed him. Every rational part of my mind agreed completely, but Ember was already moving toward the hangar himself, and some instinct deeper than fear told me that whatever was coming, he intended to meet it head-on, and I was not about to let him face it alone. The creature that broke through the hangar doors moments later was nothing like Ember, pale and skeletal, moving on too many legs with jaws that clicked and snapped with hunger rather than intelligence. It was smaller than Ember but faster, driven by pure instinct, drawn perhaps by the storm, or by scent, or by something none of us would ever fully understand. It lunged the moment it saw me standing frozen near the doorway. Ember moved faster. He met the creature mid-leap with a force that shook the entire hangar, driving it back against the metal wall hard enough to dent the reinforced plating. The fight lasted only seconds, though it felt far longer, a blur of claws and snarls and shattering ice, as Ember fought with a controlled ferocity that made it clear exactly why his kind had once been called guardians rather than beasts. When it ended, the pale creature lay still, and Ember stood over it, breathing hard, a shallow gash along his shoulder, the only sign of the danger he had just faced, without a moment of hesitation. Marsh lowered his rifle slowly, staring at the scene with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something close to respect. "Remind me," he said quietly, "never to doubt your judgment again, Hale." I did not answer right away. I was too busy kneeling beside Ember, checking the wound on his shoulder, my hands shaking with the aftershock of fear and gratitude tangled together. He leaned into me the same way he had that very first night in the maintenance bay, exhausted, trusting, alive. You didn't have to do that, I told him, though I knew he could not understand the words, only the tone, only the meaning behind them. He huffed softly against my shoulder, and somehow, that was answer enough. Word of what happened that night spread through the outpost quickly, and whatever doubts remained about keeping a blood warden among us disappeared entirely by morning. Even Owen, who had once avoided the maintenance bay out of caution, spent the following evening sitting beside Ember with a bowl of warm broth, thanking him quietly for a debt none of us could ever properly repay. I understood it better in the weeks that followed, as Ember settled into life on Kestrel 9, as though he had always belonged there, patrolling the frozen fences at night, alerting us to storms hours before our instruments detected them, curling up beside the heater during quiet evenings, while Priya read old stories aloud, and Owen complained good-naturedly about losing his favorite chair. I never became a hero in any grand sense. I never earned medals or titles beyond the strange, unofficial honor a princess from another world had given me in a cold metal hangar. I remained exactly what I always was, a man who fixes heaters and counts supply crates on a quiet outpost most of the galaxy has never heard of. But every night, when the storms howl outside and the temperature drops low enough to freeze thought itself, I feel a familiar weight settle against my legs, warm and steady and unshaken by wind or fear or 400 years of history. And I remember that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do has nothing to do with strength or power or grand destiny. Sometimes it is simply refusing to walk past something that is hurting, even when every instinct screams to look away. Ember stirs beside me now as I finish these thoughts, lifting his head briefly to check that I am still there, still safe, still exactly where he expects me to be. I rest my hand against his side, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling, after everything, something that finally feels like peace. Outside, the cold moon of Kestrel 9 continues its slow, silent turn against the endless dark, indifferent to gods, princesses, ancient bloodlines, or the fact that somewhere in its frozen fields, a simple act of kindness once quietly rewrote 4 centuries of history nobody ever expected a human to touch.